Tadinda. Some questions, yes.
Your Holiness, how is it possible to go about living in everyday life, working at a job, paying bills, taking care of family and so on, without grasping?
Without
Grasping.
Oh. And the Shambasa run cock the morta. Kasuri. The Chatang Shanja Zimba. The torch. Daya she sent to me now. 동네를 된다다 다와도 된적 된적이야 그게 제로 되고야지 남들도 봐.
So the question is, how do you understand the idea of grasping here? So for example, in relation to others, if in your engagement with others, if the engagement is tainted by forms of grasping such as strong attachment, craving, or aversion or anger and so on, then that form of grasping is undesirable. But on the other hand, when you are interacting with other sentient beings, with the awareness of that other person's needs or suffering or pain, then you need to fully engage with that other person's pain and be compassionate and be engaged with that. So there is some form of attachment, some form of engagement.
알로는 생각상부 도와주는 거데 돌아 착배 분찬세 자로 착배 타니 자도와 탈출을 제로 다른 생각한테 아주 고물로 간다 창조선진 나라래 가서 돈이 거면 아니 돌아 착배 태송해서 제로도.
So in fact, Buddhist masters have used the very word attachment in describing the quality of compassion for others. For example, in the salutation verse of Haribhadra's commentary on the Perfection of Wisdom text, there he talks about compassion that is attached to other sentient beings. And similarly, I cited Nagarjuna's text where Nagarjuna says that in the person in whom the realization of emptiness has arisen, then attachment for other sentient beings will spontaneously arise. How do you define true happiness?
디지 시다디 단도 대화 단도 대화사디 주초기 지고 그러면도 그 동네 교수 잡아 단도 대화지 단도 대화지.
So in the context of Four Noble Truths, when we are talking about suffering and happiness, then the notion of happiness is also not just from the positive characterization of a state, but also negatively characterized as a state that is free from suffering and its causes. So we are talking about a notion of happiness that is more lasting, so the lasting happiness.
Then generally perhaps happiness, usually I sort of consider happiness means deep satisfaction. So, for example, some physical hardship or some suffering can bring satisfaction. So such things is, in that category, still something positive. So then satisfaction on the level of physical satisfaction and the mental satisfaction. Now here, mainly mental level satisfaction. So as I mentioned earlier, physical suffering, physical hardship can bring mental satisfaction. So in this sense, because in this context, happiness, more mental level satisfaction.
Your Holiness, would you please explain?
Perhaps furthermore, mental level satisfaction with help of awareness. Then good. And sometimes, out of ignorance, some mental satisfaction also is possible. Isn't it? That's very temporary, short-sighted.
Your Holiness, would you please explain the method and the uses of analytic meditation? Would you please explain the method of how to use analytic meditation? Analytic meditation.
Analytically?
No.
Oh, the
topic will come later. If suffering is caused by mind, what is one to do when facing environmentally difficult situations externally that are hard to change? For example, if a spouse or a father is an alcoholic, should the partner or the child stay and seek happiness despite the partner's drinking, or take the children and seek life without the drinker? So it's the line here, the suffering being caused by the mind is too general, because even in the Buddha, we accept the presence of mind. So the cause of suffering is not just the mind itself, but it's an undisciplined, untamed mind.
Oh, that's good.
Mutuni Tagaran Deje, Digi Chore, Yanti Uje, Susuputin, and Shandajin Dogus, got the cheek and Galegos.
That digging is Narva, digging is the Cherwa.
Of course, here it depends upon how you define what you mean by happiness here.
In general sense, of course, I think there are external conditions,
yeah.
External sort of causes,
factors. So generally speaking, there are of course conditions that are external and some conditions that are internal. So then of course one has to think what is the best course of action. If there is no inherent self, what part of the mind transmigrates? This will come later. How do you overcome the sadness and anger from a difficult childhood?
I think generally, the sixth
So this we'll discuss that in the context of the perfection of forbearance. Your Holiness, you said that we relate to events based on our perceptions, not what is reality, that we need to differentiate between our reality and our perception and the reality. How will we know the reality and not to be influenced by our perceptions?
This morning when I used the word, the reality and appearance, That is within the context of two truths.
Two truths.
But generally, I think one event, one thing, if you look from one angle, you cannot see the full picture. One event, in order to know that, you have to look from various different angles. Even if it's a physical thing, from one dimension, you cannot see the fuller picture. The 3 dimensions, or 4 dimensions, or 6 dimensions. Then you get more clearer picture about the reality. So in order to know the reality, you have to look from various angles and from various dimensions. Otherwise, from one dimension appears something, but there are always possible gap in that appearance and the reality. Like that. So therefore, the investigation is very, very essential. So through investigation, the gap, appearance, and reality can reduce. Only through investigation.
So earlier, when I was talking about the gap between perception of reality, it was within the context of the teachings of the two truths.
The correspondent and the Tumeg Zawa, Nyomong Zawa, Timu Tenzi, that the Nungsu Zamlia, Chashache, Tablets in the Shinzane, that did Toya the Nungsu Tinashin, Nayarama, that's as you say, you do, and now that Mamachi. Never knew you do, and
because we were discussing this in the context of trying to understand what lies at the root of our suffering, and particularly the root of the afflictions, which is a grasping at true existence of things. And once you recognize that this grasping, the ignorance, grasping at true existence of things, engage with the events in the world, primarily on the level of perception and on the level of appearances, and then grasp onto it, and one comes to recognize that this does not accord with the actual reality, then one will be able to then gradually undermine the grip of that grasping. So that's what we were talking about.
That's wrong.
So now we will read from the text.
다 타바도 탐지 쳔배 가서 내고 주자 원토라 때네 아니 털도 주자 타바도 탐지 쳔배 고만 주야 그 담아 진짜직다 땡갱기 아니 라마디 캐심사레스 드네인드산에 타바 만주베나 시 라트이 아니세야 기행이 아니일다 아주 라리기도 봐 어빼지는 신체니 드네르베타 담바 아니 뒤땡갱기 라마드 생상하고 그래스 드네르즈는 딱금들 아니 지리니 신이 생이 좀 된다기 되내게 라마네 아니 이게 상아 도시태베 도시로병 파르기 아니 라메 캐슈로 라메 외슈로 그렇게 스코요디디 송시여래 다다 금들 아니 타바도 터지지면 고만 땡갱기 타와트지 지금 고반 쪽에 땅나 때문에 애는 왕도 전에 다 라면 진이 소리잖아요. 너들이는 소리 최주사 소리 말이.
So we were talking about the qualities that are relevant on the part of the teacher, and particularly a teacher who is going to give instruction to the students on the basis of the actual instruction of the Buddha, all of which are aimed at bringing about the realization of our temporary, immediate aim of gaining fortunate rebirth into a higher realm, and the long-term and ultimate aim of attainment of liberation. And since this is the teaching, the person who is imparting the instruction needs to possess the qualities that are necessary for imparting such actual instruction. And so here, generally, and because the quality and the effectiveness of the teaching would, to a large extent, depend upon the quality of the teacher. For example, when we choose a school, to a large extent, the quality of a school is really determined by the quality of the professors and the teachers who are working in that university or school. Similarly here, the effectiveness of the teaching to some extent is going to be determined by the quality of the teacher. So generally speaking, the Buddha has outlined in various texts the kind of qualities that are necessary to the specific level of instructions, whether it is the master of a Vinaya practice or whether it is the master of a Vajrayana teachings, highest Yoga Tantra. In all of these cases, there are specific qualities that are mentioned by the Buddha. And here in the Lamrim context, the teacher that we are looking for is someone who is able to impart instructions that would encompass the practices of all the three persons of all the three levels of capacities. The key qualities that are mentioned are the 10 qualities that are listed in Maitreya's ornament of Mahayana Sutras.
난디 도리긴 농도마 차나 지 수디 디스도가 열심히 찍디 태양 랑모 뒤에 셴 뒤에 내매버 송베스 셴 뒤에 라마테 토마를 랑기 규두어 줄 거였어 찍디 내모도가 균 누루 근데고 균 누루 태양스 대 강중중의 주변에 떡에 연년도 민다고지 줄여요 미해배 제가 뭐 지도도 균두루지 거대 아니 전에 라버를 뭐 숨동에 도어로서 숨송소 송대하디 계속 살으셔.
So in Tsongkhapa's text, which is on page 71 of volume 1, having cited a particular stanza from Maitreya's ornament of Mahayana Sutras, then Tsongkhapa writes the following. He says that it is said, those who have not disciplined themselves have no basis for disciplining others. Therefore, gurus who intend to discipline others' mind must first have disciplined their own. How should they have been disciplined? It is not helpful for them to have done just any practice and then have the result designated as a good quality of knowledge. They need a way to discipline the mind that accords with the general teachings of the Buddha. The three precious trainings are definitely such a way. So this is quite a powerful statement, and Tsongkhapa is saying that the way in which the master should have disciplined his or her own mind is according to the teachings of the three higher trainings. So since the instruction we are talking So since instruction that we are talking about, by which the students are being led to, is instructions primarily related to the attainment of liberation, and since the principal practices and that constitute the path to liberation are really the practices of the three higher trainings. So therefore, on the part of the teacher who is giving such instruction, must himself or herself embody the knowledge of the three higher trainings. And since the teacher is imparting an instruction that is not just for attainment of liberation, but also attainment of full enlightenment of the Buddhahood, therefore one needs to present a path that encompasses the practices of bodhicitta, great compassion, and so on. Therefore, the qualities relevant on the part of the teacher includes also having compassion and awakening mind.
사실은 인도산에 시베 자와데 가사가 된 진짜 최지단 진디 시득샤 사실은 인도산에 하듯이 신인 생유송 인도산에 러송은 난게 싫어고 러버티 가사가 담에 좀 싫었지 다 텔레 수도 시죽이냐 뭐 최지단에 떠고 인도산에 뒤니 떠고 진짜 수자도 뒤야 다 삼세변도가 찾아래
So, and one of the qualities listed in Maitriya's text is realization of the suchness, or realization of ultimate truth. And this partly reflects a kind of a philosophical view of the author, because the presentation is according to the mind-only school, where a distinction is drawn between selflessness of person and ultimate reality. So the wisdom in the context of 3 higher trainings is identified with the wisdom of no self, and the additional quality, realization of suchness, refers to the mind-only school's understanding of realization of selflessness of phenomena.
그래서 다 들으시면 다들 tenji lome sunzane sumne lojen tönyawas. That is Sungsha.
So when identifying the qualities relevant on the part of the student, Tsongkhapa identifies the 3 main qualities, being objective, endowed with the faculty of intelligence, and having the interest.
Yilu shebala lo surne abejo kwade bekhaji mure sunne sati 가르치는 그 objective 거로다 시에서서 대왕 간에 침배 있나 아니 대변에서 통해야지 내가 개진시가
So when searching for understanding the nature of reality, objectivity of a standpoint is very important, or the objective stance is very important, because otherwise one will be swayed by one's own biases and wishes. So therefore, it will come in the way of actually understanding the actual reality.
Then, lot of them are said 남준 대바. 남준 대바 사가 패지 고아디 안데 그도디 패지 즉로 태송이요. 패지 고아래. 태송 좋나? 저걸리래. 저걸래나 당시시래. 당시시나 그게 가서 대형 모멘에서 쉐야리야. 그 핑크로다. 사진이 인도 안데디 렉션 니셰 제베 남주던 대바 사디 내가 렉션 니셰리야. 잡아지고 봐. 렉션 니셰 가리인디 도저지고 봐. 이 도저 영화리야. 남사 대박 지지 가는 거 싶으셔. 저좀 생각하지 계속도.
So the second quality is the being endowed with intelligence, and intelligence here refers to critical intelligence, which has the ability to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong, what is correct and what is incorrect. And so the kind of intelligence we are talking about here is that of a critical, inquiring type. And this suggests that at the beginning, one needs to have a form of skepticism, a kind of a doubt. Because when you have doubt and skepticism, then this will lead to questioning. And when you go through questioning, then there is a real possibility of leading to a deeper understanding of the facts. And therefore, when you, on the other hand, if you approach right from the beginning with a single-pointed faith, then it wouldn't open up the question. So having that skepticism and a critical intelligence becomes very important.
Benar ya anda shun de shun zu mangche da mangche sore kada koso shi song yu yare teni de zane chiri je de di omun no teni je dok ju shi ji teni be yin shun de la jaja kare yare jaja di she ne go ba kare yare che go ba so ma yin be pu ning gu kare yare 다 디디 도시신이 보도가 디디 도시 전이 이 흉들 켜서 쉬어야지. 자, 디리 메이드잖아요.
So, and because of this, if you look at many of the classical Indian texts, an emphasis has been made upon identifying what is the subject matter of a particular text, what is the purpose of gaining the understanding of that subject matter, and what is the long-term ultimate purpose of gaining such knowledge, and then what is the interrelation between these three factors. And the point here is that because these texts are written for persons with critical faculty, and then a person with critical faculty, when they engage with the text, they're going to first of all check what is the main subject matter of the text, and what is the benefits and purposes, aims of gaining that knowledge, and what is the long-term final objective of these subject matter, and so on.
Yeah. 사람은 이 슝기 타냐셔다로 그래. 아니 원도 대배진다. 오늘 취지잖아. 세코레 고디 요도가. 취지잖아. 무슨 소소도에 취지도 남지 싫어게 되네.
So therefore, even in the text, we have expressions that relate to the different ways in which people engage with the text. One is those of slightly inferior faculty approach the text primarily from more of a faith and devotion, and those of a kind of a higher critical faculty of mind approaches a text more from the point of view of understanding the reality that is presented.
Yeah. And
then the Tsongkhapa explains the actual process by which one relies upon a spiritual mentor on the level of one's mind, what state of mind should one adopt, and also in actual practice, in physical action.
Kashintua Sadish could do the Tishtua. Kerry Lama Kashintu Tukana, Lama Jitana, Mirigal on the Chivata, Tomosum the Gera Chawala, Jawa Chena, Tazacham Shena. Nisme. Kasari Trubishua. Go at 6 years of Lambercha at Tishute.
So we read from page 86 towards the end of the explanation of the process by which one must rely upon a spiritual mentor, particularly through action. Tsongkhapa writes the following. This is third paragraph. He raises a question. We must practice in accordance with the Guru's words. Then what if we rely on the Gurus and they lead us to an incorrect path or employs us in activities that are contrary to the three vows? Should we do what they say?
Tell me, do it, Dalai. Treatment is not double show, shit. Gunsho thing like young, get chola, tell the tumor chola, make it chola, me tumor chola, she soon bear, take all the minion girls. So that Miribal and Mijuani, give a junior one, sour your toes.
So then Tsongkhapa responds to this query that he raises, and he says that he writes, with respect to this, Gunaprabha's Sutra on the Discipline states, if the abbot instructs you to do what is not in accord with the teachings, refuse. Also the Cloud of Jewel Sutra states, with respect to virtue, act in accord with the Guru's words, but do not act in accord with the Guru's words with respect to non-virtue. Therefore, you must not listen to non-virtuous instructions. And then he writes, the 12th birth story, referring to Jataka tales, clearly gives us the meaning of not engaging in what is improper.
Yeah. When Lama Silim, Lama Silim were any Simsame towns of the any Choji Umabe towns of the the Choji, that Lama Mangu Yavanane, the Lama so the Silimunangari. Rede any Silimba Rangi, the Lama so in which you any Lame Tawa, Simsame Tawa tea, and Yamshilangi Yamava. So Choji Rangaya Umabetara can pure. Sabbath Toa.
So, to give an example, for example, with respect to Master Atisha, among all the teachers, his principal teacher was, whom he considered to be the most important teacher, was Srilingpa. And Srilingpa was particularly revered by Atisha for his teachings on the bodhicitta and awakening mind. However, Srilingpa's own philosophical standpoint represented that of mind-only school. So just because Srilingpa happened to be Atisha's most important guru, did not mean that Atisha would follow his guru's instructions in every field. So Atisha, while being a devout student of Srilingpa, when it came to philosophical understanding of the Buddha's teaching, he adopted the Madhyamaka, the middle way school, rather than his teacher's mind-only standpoint.
Tantene Jungsu Dodu the Tembalas, and Jungsu with the Tolodoka was that Jungsu with the Joya, the Kasajuti. Joy Chuche, many are not to be Sungari. That Tolodoka was at the teaching that.
So, and then towards the end of this section, Tsongkhapa presents a summary of the manner in which one needs to relate to one's spiritual mentor. And here he divides that section into two parts, the actual process itself and refutation of misunderstanding or misconceptions.
Daniel Tangude, Jungsu General, that Timbre, Yala de Bacheni, that the Antishundus, Tundu Tuns of Nietzsche, and the Tunjinanjo Didi, Soso to Chat. Then the Tunzungi, and the sage surgery water. She got a Jigni Kajaya, that did some content. Tunzum Winamidi, Chazanchi, got Gawalia, Goyachi. And a Chanshi Gundu Dendiachi, Gunduzane, Tunzum Winamlingi, Tunjinam in the porter. Tunjinam lingi, Tunzonam in the porter. Don't should subsidy, but need Tunjeti, Gavachal to Juliachi on it.
So, in the first section that deals with the actual process, Tsongkhapa explains according to two parts. One is what needs to be done during the actual formal sitting meditations, and what activities should one engage in during the post-meditation periods. And during the actual formal sitting session here, with respect to this proper reliance on a spiritual teacher, the main practices that are presented are primarily in the format of the 7 limb practices and also 6 preparatory practices. And then he explains what kind of activities should one engage in during the post-meditation periods as well, which would include maintaining a kind of a balanced habit with relation to one's food, diet, and also learning to utilize even one's sleep as period towards enhancement of Dharma practice, and then guarding the gateway of the doors of the senses, and living with greater sense of awareness. So these are the main after-session practices, and the point here is to engage in one's Dharma practice in such a way so that both the formal sitting sessions and post-meditation sessions each can complement each other, so that the periods during the formal sitting sessions will enhance virtuous activities during the post-meditation periods, and the practices and activities during the post-meditation periods will enhance the quality of your meditation during the formal sitting practices so that each complement each other, so that you find a way in which the entire 24 hours of your day can be utilized towards the accumulation of merits and also enhancement of virtue.
Yeah. 단 들어 로도 세워 세티 subject 한데 다 조금 계속 이거 숨겨야
So in the second outline, when he talks about refuting misunderstandings pertaining to meditation, the main point Tsongkhapa is making is the importance of analytic meditation.
가지고 가서 안 되지. 당 스티니 마스리 쳔도 딱 곰세하게 된다디 굶지 된다 이 말에 딱 랑강기 코메아지 딱 콤바스죠 딱 안데 보사가 놓고 막 곰슬잖아요 제보고 찌 쏘알 때네 디스주거들 곰스여서
So the Tibetan equivalent of the English term meditation is gom, bhavana in Sanskrit. And what this indicates or suggests is a form of deliberate cultivation and familiarization. Generally, khompa is habituation or becoming familiar, but gompa is an active verb which indicates an agency who is deliberately involved in cultivating a particular form of familiarization.
This one, that. That tells the result. Then it's the most mother. Rang some you want to do. Some you want to show on the song. At the day design, any that to me, Meduna. I think nobody from as soon as we wake up in early morning or late morning I think some of you may be late morning when you get up. I think nobody at that moment they expect or today I should have more trouble. I should have more sort of fight or more anger. I think nobody feel like that. Instead, from that moment, today I wish very peaceful day, very leisure day, and a happy day, that kind of thing. Yet, there's many problems. So on this planet, I think 6 billion entire human beings, nobody wants trouble. But there are plenty of trouble. Most of this trouble, essentially man-made trouble. Clear? So, one way, nobody wants trouble. At the same time, a lot of man-made problem or trouble. So there is, the problem because of that, the point is, we want something good, but our mind fully dominated by because of the afflicted emotion. Afflicted emotion out of ignorance, all levels of ignorance, ultimate ignorance, and also some leisure because of the grosser level of ignorance. Simply, you do not know the reality. Just look from one angle and then decide, this is bad, this is good. Like that. So now here, meditation means try to control our mind. That means our mind should not let dominant by ignorance or by this afflicted emotion. So just wish, my mind should not dominate by ignorance or afflicted emotion. Emotion, very powerful. Destructive emotion, very, very powerful. Won't listen, our wish. So only thing is, we have to cultivate countermeasure all these afflicted emotion. That's the only way to reduce the afflicted emotion. So in order to countermeasure, or in order to development of the countermeasure, we cannot buy from shop or those sophisticated machines, you see, cannot produce these things. So only through mental effort. Now that is the meaning of meditation. Like that. So the familiarization about these counter force. Through that way, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, even sometimes life after life, the effort still continue, life after life. Then gradually these counter force, because of habituation, you see, gradually increase. The positive side increase, the negative side automatically reduce, because these two things cannot remain together. It's contradictory. Like that. That's the rang sim ji wang tong wo de rang sim ji wang sim nyong be xiang wang du song la wang ge de ba da wan de na ya da wa ma ya min de bu dong ge ji yong de da di rang sim ji wang du sim nyong be xiang wang du so yi ting che re sta de.
So in this certain part of the text here, Tsongkhapa therefore makes the following point. He says that the problem with us is that we are dominated by our mind, and our course of actions and everything is dictated by our mind. However, our mind is in turn dominated and dictated by the afflictions, so it is under the power of the afflictions. And so because of this, although what we truly wish for is happiness, but we end up, enduring suffering, and that's and this is the reason why this is the case.
Yeah. 다 로 모티베 쳐디에 가서 올피 그 답좀 자도 와. 그 링도 컴바르 받다. 다 내년별 쳐디 한테 신의 고조고. 그 숙신주로 와. 다 년별 쳐디 간다 숙신주의 뭐 이러잖아요. 다꼭 믹스하게 배 쏴와잖아요. 군지 때문에 콤바 된 거야, 직차가. 처직네 미준초 그 여자다 이 빵자 그런 용어배 처디디 남장 망보 또아 간다고배 급으로 그때 중내배 급쳐야 되는 거지. 나도 너무 망고지 나랑저배 랑럽배 닝녀에서 봐. 배나 대샤스름나 틈비게 수주겐지. 샤당스럽도 미준비게 세게 랑쪽게 나빠셔도 와. 오늘 저 저불도 소스도 와. 랑을 판다겐지. 자 판배 설지 따라를 내용이지. 또 와. 자다 진지기다 놈줄배 담면다 지금 타네. 다 요문게 저기가 인도산에 대년별 처디에 놈무 니미스톤에 로 찍부찌기 놈무 도자리 세대 찍로 찍을 라키 말라. 단 놈무 소스 아니 노 첼레 대교를 치게 남기게 다도 망고지 가서 짜체 다 들리게 못한다 제가 하셔도 자 이제 인도산에 그 년별 처디에 그 남랑 망보지 다 시고도 남자만 지금 차 터네 아니 님몰이야도 님못 된 거지. 근데 이번 인도산에 좀 전에랑 샤샤네 그러다 주부들이 송사람들 송니 남자만고 쉬고 저 송대야. 다가는 신기 루루야서로서 뒤뒤기 다 대바의 양대천 장면 뒤뒤에 흉몽고 딘저진 자과야 뒤 주저 뒤제 유기 모두에 선데 매버서야 주저 다그래 말이야 겜도 와. 네 뒷말람 좀 돼야지 말와. 딱고 감다 매버 라라다 참아지기 그 탑시 멍굴지기 때문에 그 연구하시 뭐 인도산에 치료도 남지기 싫어 배고도가 다 달라야 단다 디크도 디송샤 투중 싫어 투중 싫어 주전에 당연히 라메만 데셰템 태버도 직 소수 빼실 때니 태버도 니 되지기 타네 당연히 들들이 이물 삼니 단다 멍구지 셰데버디 투중 싫어 다 퇴배 된다라 양도 삼다 잡아쳐 다들 배지 이거 시고는 제사에 배진 줘요. 춘이지 봐. 아니 저지를 봐. 아니 때려지 봐. 태루지 봐서. 어다 제 고르지. 다 달라. 배나 셈 시디 시리 장도 되니 봐. 네 춘이 봐. 셈 계지 두두여다 봐. 계지 두두여다 차네. 그 semleya 지금 넘주로 만다마다 교어야 여대버디 그 춘이 버리 춘이 그리고 상식다 다되네 sem그 남도 지 오래 다 sem그 나라 지 유달라 현진 착벌 로직 유달라 단어 로직 다 유달라 단어 로데다 유달라다 배나 그 세월로니부터 간다셔. 또한 저다베나 차단이 슬로베니 배제를 간다서 배제를 쳐도 지고래. 제니 또 대주 배제 춘이래셔. 생각나라 간다요데. 배나 칭모벌이야 간다요래. 배나 사회적과 장애적과 간다요데 춘이지다. 다 춘이 뒤ቷ네 다 생각나라 간다요데 다 뒤뒤기 타네 다 심지 누버야 숙체로 심이나 아니 디 간들기에 지시도 마도 숙총도돼야 다디 배지 딜리링면도 다 sem랑랑게 두더게 다 진짜이다 그 틈비 소리다 가다 셈 똑바로 레리레리 거라 지 거라 두더게 초인도잖아요 그 le nomjuru meda yunguyewa le niwaru meda shushur duguyeda ba tsu jadi peje debe ko sto chomero dene sem namdo re ko cheleru meda yeda ba ta di chawajebe ba peje sha chosaki ta di ko sem dran gi shebe cheni ta sem tue di yunguyewa sem modue 동행 유구여부터 시ebe 전에 뒤에 처디리 컨테스트 야 코네코도 빼고 여기 시ebe 제 아니 금세 상담에 저대들이 다시 태도를 그래 다와 된대비 거네 양양 삼인도 전에 다 sembe 매번이 돼야지 다시 다다 법 타쳐지 타쳐야 돼 미스기 타쳐면 봐 소소 상담 금세 들을 때네 다 타치를 내주더니 삼천대하다디 성적을 내면 되면서 지도 퇴배자는 이것이 년도 찬도 수시 접다네 삼전날 삼내 중앙이 남주로이 태송 채우셔 선송셔야 되리셔 다 성중이 싫어 내면 되다 다 때부셔 차 다전에 성중이 내면 된다라 아니 제식도 공배 공부승니 윤두산에 아니 림베기 공중기는 똑같게 돼야지 뒤차게 산다들이 인도 냐는 도마 시지로 롭종치 돼야지 그렇지도 와 되는 바로 양내양도 삼배다 성중도 하시도 뒤에 배지 자금 조르셔 조 자금돼 다 공중기 다 잡아시고 미치고 제대로 미고 제지도 샤니 이거 금지돼야지 다뒤 조금만 줘요
어디에 먹고도 안 가면다. 어디에 저 손을 빼는 거야.
So when we compare our own states of mind, we will recognize that the undisciplined and untamed states of mind are those aspects of the mind which we are very familiar with. And because of long habituation over many lifetimes, they tend to be very powerful, and they're also quite spontaneous and natural that when they arise. Therefore, when we cultivate the direct antidotes against them, in a sense, we are learning a new set of skills. We are learning actually a new way of thinking, a new way of being. Therefore, initially, these antidotal forces are going to be very weak, and because we are learning something kind of quite new. But however, over time, as we cultivate, our habituation will increase, and as our habituation to the antidotal forces become more and more strengthened, then their opposite, which are the undisciplined states of mind, including the afflictions and the afflictive emotions, they will come to decrease in their force, and that's the way in which the processes work. And secondly, one thing that needs to be done is also to recognize that how, when we talk about afflictions, we are talking about a tremendously diverse phenomena. And afflictions are, in some sense, very opportunistic. Wherever they find their ways, they can manifest themselves in many different ways. So we have to understand, first of all, the various ways in which afflictions take their form and how they tend to appear to us. For example, if you look at attachment and anger, attachment, we see it as kind of a friend. Attachment is that quality of our mind which tends to attract others towards us. So it helps us bring together the conditions that we deem helpful for our survival. Similarly, anger and hatred tends to be those mental states that help us deal with obstacles that we don't find desirable, and they are there to help us protect against these obstacles that we don't want. So anger and hatred arises as almost like a kind of a trusted friend there to protect us. So we can see how, first of all, afflictions are so diverse, and secondly, how kind of ingenious ways in which afflictions can appear to us. And so therefore, in correspondence to this diversity of the afflictions, we also need to cultivate a very rich, diverse antidote as well, corresponding to them. And therefore, for example, Buddha, when he gave the Dharma, he taught 84,000 heaps of teachings. And similarly, if you look at the commentarial literature that help explain the Buddha's teachings, for example, Nagarjuna and his disciples and many other great Indian masters, there are so many extensive treatises. But the ultimate aim of all of these teachings, including the Buddha's sutras, are really one, which is to help us deal with untamed state of mind and bring about its transformation. Because the afflictions that disturb our mind are so diverse, and they can manifest in so many different forms, therefore, and also they can manifest differently to different individuals. Therefore, to suit the need of all the diverse practitioners, and also to to come up with the appropriate antidote against specific forms of afflictions, there are all these diverse teachings that we find. And so not only must we understand the afflictions themselves, secondly, we have to understand their functions, thirdly, we have to understand their causes, both internal and external conditions that give rise to these afflictions. And on that basis, we need to then cultivate these antidotes within us, because even after simply recognizing the destructiveness of the afflictions, if we just simply make a wish that may they go away, that approach is not going to be effective at all. So this simple recognition of their destructiveness is not adequate. We need to deliberately cultivate the antidotes within us. Now, how do we cultivate these antidotes within us? We do so through different levels of understanding. The level of understanding derived from learning, level of understanding derived through critical reflection, and level of understanding derived through meditative practice. So the first level of understanding really arises on the basis of either listening to a teaching from a teacher, or on the basis of oneself studying the text and so on. So you cultivate the intellectual understanding of the various characteristics of the afflictions and the appropriate antidotes and so on. Then, on the basis of that understanding, you then need to critically reflect upon it repeatedly and deepen your understanding so that you arrive at a point where there is a genuine sense of conviction in their efficacy. So at that point, you have arrived at the second level of understanding derived through critical reflection. And on these two levels, the analytic approach is the primary form of meditation. So the meditation takes particularly an analytic form on these two levels. And then, now when you are engaging in the critical reflection and using analytic meditation, then one needs to use also forms of reasoning, taking into account particularly the four principles, and which are the four avenues by which we engage with reality. So this is the principle of nature, a principle of dependence, principle of function, and on the basis of these three principles, the principle of evidence. So to give an example, with relation to the nature of mind, we can say that the fact that mind is a phenomenon that whose essential characteristic is that of knowing and luminosity, that is a principle of nature. Similarly, within the mind, all the mental states are by their very nature subject to change. They change moment by moment basis. They are transient, and that is again principle of nature. So we take, and furthermore, in the mental domain, we also see there is a law of contradiction, opposing forces. For example, we know that hatred and anger towards someone is contradictory to a loving kindness and compassion towards that person. So these two opposing forces, they contradict each other. Similarly, so there are many different, so for example, even in the external world, we see opposing forces like heat and cold. They oppose each other so that they cannot coexist without one undermining the other. Similarly, in the mental world, you will have opposing forces. And the fact that there is this law of opposing forces is again part of nature. So that belongs to the principle of nature. So you take these into account, and then on the basis of that, then when you apply cause and effect relations, then you are using the principle of dependence. And then on the basis of recognizing these causal relations, then we will also come to understand specific functions of different mental states. Each of them have their own separate functions. Then here we are taking into account the principle of function, and then on the basis of these three principles, nature, dependence, and function, then we can use the logic of evidence. Given this, such and such will follow. Given this, such and such will be the consequence. So on that basis, we will come to be able to apply the understanding of these principles, and therefore apply the correct antidotes against the various aspects of the untamed mind, and bring about the knowledge. So on the basis of this analytic meditation, when you then move on to the third level of understanding, there the primary approach will be more absorptive meditation, where there is less analysis, but the primary approach is to maintain a single-pointed statement, placement of mind upon the concluded fact, and on that basis, as your single-pointed experience of that fact becomes more and more evident, then one will move finally to the understanding derived from meditative practices. So in this way, the transformation really takes place.
싫어도 남지기 싫어 그게다 잘라쳐야 생이 개치 뭐 이두산에 미르된디 다 나가서 쳐요래 미르된 그 단에 잡아쳐야 누가 죽신 뭐요래 드디어 이두산에 다 신이 때네 로시다잖아 버샤바 사달이야 대단한 인물라면 그거든 이거 시다는 수시하는 니제 다 대단한 인물라면 다 가서 그래 그래다지 꾸야리야 땅에 탄조고도 소리 말이 다디 탄조 무슨 탄조섬 니가섬 니시셨다
So what becomes clear is the role of the analytic meditation here. So when we talk about understanding developed on the basis of learning and critical reflection, one needs to use the faculty of intelligence, and therefore human form of existence is really a form of existence that is endowed, equipped with the best faculty of intelligence, and therefore for a Dharma practitioner, having the human existence becomes very important. So in Tsongkhapa's text, he then explains that so having relied upon a spiritual teacher, then he explains how to make one's the stages by which one then trains one's mind. And this is divided into two sections. The first is how to motivate oneself into training the mind, and second is the actual training process itself. And in this first section, how to motivate oneself to engage in the Dharma practice, here one of the important points that he makes is recognizing the preciousness of human existence. And there, first of all, he explains the characteristics of human existence, of leisure and opportunity, and then the fact that this form of human existence has a great purpose and it's purposeful, and third, that it is rare to find such a human existence in future.
Yeah. Then you wish to be Swiss Chevalier. Lamji Namshala never gave us a
So then explaining how to actually make one's human existence meaningful, he explains first a general presentation of the path, and then and then the actual practice of how to make that human existence meaningful.
Yeah. 다 람지 남샤는 네바니아 생들이야 다데 그냥 기부숨 데 뭐였어 다 아니 대대대 다 람디디만 뭐였어님 다 대양 다 람중기다 지금만 거네 컨시 처음에 간다게 과야다와 장다다 런이 통도 예시고 기부드는 탐을시 선생님 다 과야된데 원두 분소 대삼시 다 내가 찾아내야 다 편도니네
대잠식 다 탐드니에 다 튜니쟁기 다 기부디 기부 타마체 대대대 애는 원도디 주베 탑디디 탑잠식 탑잠데 다 기부스문 나미
Then in the actual presentation of the general structure of the path, Tsongkhapa introduces the concept of the practices of the persons of three capacities, and defines each of them. So, for example, in defining the person of the initial capacity, he cites from Atisha's lamp, where he reads, "Know to be least those persons who diligently strive to attain solely the joys of cyclic existence by any means for their welfare alone." So this gives the definition of what constitutes someone as a person of initial capacity. And here the primary kind of aim of the practitioner is to really seek happiness in the mundane terms, and then the his or her approach is again kind of influenced by that motivation.
다전에 세베 달라 접사신 딕벨레레 도다니 컨시런 시점들이 기부되는 제시자스 다 세베 핀소 타다리아 니미스 다가서 루에르 신바 녀모베 샤완첸 두지기 동네르 신바 세베 관에 대달라 접사신 세베 달라 접사신 딕벨레레 도다니 있잖아 디 딕베디 개와도 딕베 수노도 수노 모임베사기 야체하게 딕버디 맘체 안데 딕스로즈는 지버셔봐 딕버셔봐 시전에다 가다 군중 레뉴다 송기야서래 다가다 고아 편집다 내 송기야래 제대로다 시바 시베 지과 다 가서래 시베 지과 때버쳐베 아니 딕벨레레 도타니스 야나 딕버스는 녀모를 자리에 자 조금만 녀모를 자 녀모 왕게 템베 아니 펜시를 해야 돼 똑같이었으네 저도 봐 딕을 도다니 추텔을 때네스 추텔을 럼네 가봐 아니 컨시 정시 잡되니스 컨시 아니 정리 다 녀모 사변도 잡아 신의 시외 땡도 대회 타바 잠도 전두니게 런이 전두니게 기부진 정시자스.
So, and then in the next Tsongkhapa, citing from Atisha, defines the person of middle capacity, and here he cites the following: those persons are called medium, who stop sinful actions and turn their backs on the joys of cyclic existence and diligently strive just for their own peace. So here the reference is being made to those individuals whose main motivation is to seek freedom from cyclic existence on the basis of a deep sense of disenchantment towards all forms of cyclic existence, joys of cyclic existence. So here the reference to the sinful actions is not to be understood in a conventional sense, but rather it refers to either afflictions in general, or sinful here refers to those activities that lead to birth in cycle of existence. So these are practitioners who, disenchanted by all forms of joys of cyclic existence, turn away from this, and on that basis diligently strives for their own freedom, peace and tranquility, in the sense of freedom from cyclic existence. And these practitioners are characterized as being of middle capacity.
다전에 대대변이 가소래 그게 타버드야게 람 러버스는 다 냠네 다는 식이다 참소소등기 다 러버스 시르글 레베냐면 나는 참소소등 남들리고 왔다 참소소등 남냠니체야 패지면도 패지면도다 어제 간다
sensu lam lamne dede kone ta thaba sam tubyati gibunjing lamche ta jene gibuchimbe lamdi rangju tobe tungmeji condition yi tungmede yangda so kun gibuchen choyin no seneta rangni 아니 냠을 빠하네 난게 대도가 심지어 탐제 등의 규도 잡아도 전도가 삼배 아니 대다가셔도 남지제가 고마 전도 얘기 대 기부침보 대대비 남지주에 탑 아니 고주셔주는 전도 창조를 쓴다 아니 대다가 심배 친주다 팔도 심배 친주다 냠네 드저제마 냠네 쳐야지 아니 기부침을 쉬고
So in this middle practitioners of medium capacity, the main practices on the path that they will engage in will be the 3 higher trainings, and also particularly in the context of the higher training in wisdom, the 37 aspect of the path to enlightenment also falls within that category. So these are the main practices they will engage in to bring about the realization of their aim, which is the freedom from cyclic existence for their own sake, that peace and tranquility. And then next, Tsongkhapa defines the person of great capacity, and here he cites from the lamp, and it reads, those persons are called superior who sincerely want to extinguish all the sufferings of others by understanding their own suffering. So here Atisha is explaining that those practitioners who on the basis of their own experience of suffering and extends that to all other beings and come to recognize the need to bring about the end of suffering of all beings, and on that basis they develop an aspiration to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings, and from that motivation engages in the practices such as cultivation of the ultimate awakening mind, conventional awakening mind, and the 6 perfections and so on. And these practices therefore are part of the practices relevant to the practitioner of great capacity.
나 기부sun 그 람디 줍제관의 샤백이나 원도 줍지 기부충 내리를 니체네 윤주장방배 내리를 주야 기분팅 시류장 방배 내리 터도 남기 계획고 다들 주지 기부충이라 그러다 이 주전에 소변다 다디 개제세양은 샤백이나 그래서 강조하는 소리에다 간다 지금 미준쇼 번에 차는 샤베이나 자와 상계의 최대 타버드야 최시네. 자서 되게 잘 넘쳤지. 자, 당연히日本 당국대 냐라 타버드를 결정해 유몽체 유몽 년부 땡땡 공을 냐라 유몽의 왕기 템베 예주 도매야지 기부심을 주지. 미기주 보야지. 기부심을 주지. 다 되네 미기주 다디 샤는 내배랑시. 디페지 또 조시당 니부대야 소초도. 그래서 안데데 드리메 인도산에 우모십집에 나라 선한 멤버 당분도 세대야지. 동네지 동네 계지기 두 선한 모임벨에 떠야지 기부심을 주지. 다 되네 바로 다는 더버시세요. 되게 더버시 진 들루야 매다 먹 사용 되게. 들루 매다도. 단 들루 찍을 집에 있나? 아니 바로 다는 더버시세요. 되게 아니 가서 주고디. 대권은 시에 권에 다 된주 대권은 시에 권에 등진 방네 타버 줘야지. 유문 방배 타버 줘야지. 타버 다시 군도 봐서야 되게 유문 대시하고 바자 아니 단도 보야지. 바자도 저거 보야. 단디니 시리 보야지. 시리 방에 남기게라고 봐줘야지. 그래 있어요.
So these 3 practices that are relevant to the persons of these 3 capacities can be viewed from the point of view of their aims. So the teachings related to the initial capacity, the aim is to attain fortunate rebirth. And the aim of the practices of medium capacity is to bring about the realization of liberation from samsara, which is part of definite goodness. And the aim of the practices and teachings of the great capacity is to bring about the attainment of Buddha's omniscient state. And also, as explained before, although when we talk about Buddha Dharma or Buddhist spirituality, it has to be defined in terms of whether or not it contributes towards the attainment of liberation. So we explained how the attainment of liberation defines the Buddha Dharma. And however, when it comes to actual practice, one must proceed in a gradual manner, in a proper sequence. So although the aim is to attain liberation, on the first stage, as Aryadeva points out in the 400 stanzas, on the first level one must avert from the demeritorious actions. So here, before one can actually directly counter the afflictions, one needs to first of all tackle the behavioral expressions or manifestations of these afflictions. So these would be the negative and destructive actions of body, speech, and mind that one engages in, and as presented in the morality of abstaining from the 10 negative actions. And if you look at the kind of the principle behind the formulation of the ethics of morality of the 10, abstaining from 10 negative actions, the main point there, at least in the Buddhist ethics, is dealing with the consequences of anger and hatred. So, and therefore, avoidance of harming others, causing harm on others, is the key principle there. And so at this level, the practitioner is trying to not directly challenge the afflictions themselves, but rather deal with the behavioral expressions, manifestations of these afflictions. And so this is the level of the initial capacity. And then at the second level, as Aryadeva's text points out, in the middle, one needs to cease grasping at self. So here, then it is the afflictions themselves that are being targeted and directly targeted and eliminated. And then the third level, which Aryadeva points out, finally one must bring about end to all distorted views. So here, this relates to the practices of the great capacity, where not only the afflictions themselves, but even the propensities created by these afflictions and the imprints are also being removed. So you can relate the three practices of the three capacities in those manners as well.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
다 기부순기 람디디 ora ngama 시체님 근데 치마치마 디간이야 내배점이 다 차대하래 그다음에 기부충을 람 털네 기부증을 람냐면 치아지 명월해 거래 기부충능을 저거 되리를 못한 거제샤 디 가르스는 천디낭신 도야 돼 천디낭신 도백관에 아니 치면낭신 도야 돼 이면 이거 되체 디니관에 아니 랑니게 다 타바토느냐 로직레 가사주디 타바마토나 레닌지 샹완전도 예바디 동예베 랑신이 버지 야오 상민도 자네 다디 현진도 파 카베니 근데 니지고 배야들레 다 기우심을 람 줘야지 다 도스는 거라 그림 로당 거라 그림 예전이라도 가
So if you look at the teachings and practices of the three capacities, the sequence of the order is really definite, because one cannot jump onto the practices of the middle capacity and great capacity without laying the foundation of the initial capacity. So, and also, if you look at it, what is happening in the context of these three practices is that by engaging in the practices that are relevant to the initial capacity, the practitioner learns to turn away from obsessive concerns about this life and moves more towards the concerns of the future life. So that kind of turning occurs on the basis of the practices of the initial capacity. And then on the next level, by reflecting deeply upon the nature of suffering in samsara, then the person is also able to turn away from attachment and preoccupations to the concerns of next life as well. So then on the basis of these two, turning away from preoccupations, excessive preoccupations of the concerns of this life and the future life, one then is able to develop a deep sense of disenchantment towards cyclic existence as a whole and develop a genuine yearning or aspiration to gain freedom, and also understand the need for freedom. So once you have gained that, and when you then shift the focus and extend that same awareness and realization onto other sentient beings, then compassion arises, and then it takes you to the next level, which is the practices of the great capacity. So even in terms of the way in which our mind progresses in terms of the stages of transformation, the order of the sequence is kind of determined.
Yeah. That's the reason why. Lam Rim Chenmo, and Lord of Tasula, Panshaw, Senny, Sony, Losero, Chip Kazota, Law, that give Chungu, Los Zamk Dijati, or any one to turn to near turning somebody gave us a check, Tango to turn inside that there is a Zodi to make you to me. That Kasuri to make you to make it up and Nazor, start Chambo Yadengaki, Nandru to me, let Tandulo, Drune, Nandru to me, let Tire, don't want to do Salisha. Tandi Kasuri to make you want to say a Dambashis or Shabina. To make you to make the Pache. Tidruji Sunamai Beladi, Gunju Pache. Sunamai Bele, Gunna Longigi, Napsum Nesum Lotta, and Yomotusum Rabar Chasson, or Didi, Yomo the Gunjun Shed, then you the Gunjun Shed. That to make you to make want to cheve, Tidruji Gunjun Shed. That day, Nyambo. Migu students, Lam Rim Chenmo. Tell it then, Nandru to Mele Rishitane, Mondulu and Totavati, Goting Chenmo. The Regiment. Chazagawa that the Ranga Tuja, Mondu Duyagi, to Chasanchi, Givuchum Chona, Dabi. So that day, Nandru to Messamejela, any Gamduta Landani, Givuchum Chona, Sondoa. That gives you technical Chayada, can't turn to near and do Yagi, Tablam, Chazan Stabi. So that gives you Lam, gives you some you make to Jetala, Korean Dodon to be a Chazan Stabi. Don't lot on them of Chabina. Any tension to Geneva, Chometa will let you to Korean in something, was a Ninjugan Malay. Namju and the Lamzuna Society. Tanzania, Salo long ever, Yellow, Sendina Shadow. She Tanjota Mirawas. Lander Milu, what Majan, Lander Milu, quiet Donenum, Yayasama, Chimena Shadow, Chimena Shadow, Maja, Tadar Gombe, quiet Penzola, Ninjuria Sondoa, the Lord of Nujusha. The Lam Rim Codulia, Lander di, you Chungliaja, that was simple.
So, in the Lamrim literature, sometimes the phrase is used that one of the qualities of the Lamrim teachings is that it is beneficial and effective with respect to practitioners of any level of mental capacity. And the point here is that depending upon what is your kind of, mental inclination and primary spiritual motivation. Depending upon that, one can find the practices that are appropriate for the fulfillment of that aspiration in the Lamrim teachings. For example, if the practitioner is that of initial capacity, where the primary aspiration of the practitioner is to gain freedom from potential suffering in an unfortunate realm of existence in next life, then within that context, that practitioner can relate to the Dharma from within the framework of in fact, the Four Noble Truths. So here, the suffering that needs to be identified is the evident suffering, particularly of an intense form, and that are found in the unfortunate realms of existence. And then the origin of suffering here would be the negative actions that one would commit that involve inflicting harm upon others. So that would be the karmic action. And then the afflictions would be not the three poisons in general, but rather the more specific forms of them, the covetousness, harmful intention, and wrong views. And so these will be the kind of the equivalent of the afflictions. So, and then the path, the equivalent of the path would be the adopting of the morality, abstaining from the 10 negative actions would be the path. And the cessation would be the temporary freedom that one will gain as a result of attaining a favorable rebirth. So you can see within that context, all the Four Noble Truths can be present. And in fact, the aspiration is to seek freedom from, negative, unfortunate, rebirth. Therefore, that is the aspiration, and all the practices and conditions that are necessary for the realization of that aim are all fully presented in the context of the teachings on the initial capacity. So, so in the Lamrim text approach, so after explaining the sufferings of the lower realms of existence, then the actual practices are presented in terms of taking refuge in the three jewels, and from whom you seek refuge from the unfortunate rebirth, and then the actual, on that basis, one engages upon the practices of following the law of karma. So here you have all the practices complete. However, there are other alternative presentations where the elements of the practices are sequenced slightly different, sparsed, divided slightly differently. For example, in the approach of turning away from false attitudes, for example, in Tsongkhapa's three principal elements of the path, recognition of the preciousness of human existence and awareness of its transient nature, impermanence, are related to the practices of initial capacity. And then contemplation of the law of karma and reflection upon the sufferings of the lower realms are actually included in the practices of the middling capacity, where these are used as a basis for developing a deep sense of disillusionment towards samsaric existence and cultivating true renunciation. So sometimes different approaches tend to divide the elements of the teachings slightly differently, but in Lamrim, in this text, all of these are brought into the practices of the initial capacity. So there is a completeness to the entire practices.
기부중 사바종 사바대 집에서 로도서 다 몰라 지들 심어드니 걸로 제가 지들 심어드니 탑된 봤으니 다 심어드니 걸로 제가 다 달래야 아니 메다와서 나들이 메다와 좀 된데 이게 댄시 소매 그돌이야 담바시리야 캐주시리시리체니 캐주주루셔니 메다서 주루 사가 되리 다음은 신기 다가다가 사게 신나라
늦었든지 미다고 사실은 동 저든지 또 나와 양런들 쉬었어요. 송샤리 늦었든지 미다고 하세요. 다디 미다고다 안다다 대시 수백 그도 미다고디 미다고 처음시 안다 그래서 우리 추기도 수백 그도 미다고디 미다고 처음시 다 안다 대야다 미다고 송대야디 기부 중국 걸이야 동해지 동해래다 너야 디가 왜 미다고 거야디 균지 미다고 하사디 뭐라고 미다고 하사디 자 따지당 아주 차샤나 일단 미 겨울 차샤베이나 미 겨울에 다 간다지 그 소리 다 선대 섬로 선대게 다 겨울람베 주도야 돼 치워체 계획 준비 체 가도야 돼 치워체니 또 처음이라고 해서 송이물이 다 메시지 하십니다. 다 메다고 겁나 kada tengzig loti yani ko shushung du yare tengzig loti nyama manguchi le udoga.
So and then in explaining the actual way to take full advantage of life of leisure and opportunity, then Tsongkhapa explained this in terms of training the mind in the stages of path shared with this person of small capacity. And the first of this is developing a state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives. And it is in this context the meditation on cultivating awareness of impermanence and death is presented. And the teaching on impermanence is a very important teaching of the Buddha. For example, if you look at the public sermon on the Four Noble Truths, impermanence is one of the characteristics of suffering. And in fact, the presentation of the Four Noble Truths is done with each Noble Truth with 4 characteristics. So altogether there are 16 characteristics that explain the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And among the 4 characteristics of the suffering, the first is impermanence. And similarly, in the Buddhist tradition, we speak of 4 seals of Buddhism that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. All contaminated phenomena are in the nature of suffering. All phenomena are emptiness and devoid of selfhood. And nirvana is true peace. So these are the 4 seals. Again, here, the first one is the fact of impermanence of all conditioned phenomena. So in these teachings, such as the Four Noble Truths and the 4 seals, when the Buddha is teaching impermanence, of course, the main understanding of impermanence is a subtle level of impermanence. In the context of the practices of initial capacity, the understanding of impermanence is not really at that subtle level, but more at an evident, grosser level, where we understand impermanence in terms of death or cessation. So, for example, if we take a human existence or a life of a sentient being, then when the continuity of that particular life comes to an end, and that is seen as the impermanent nature of that birth. So awareness of death is the main impermanent understanding that is being cultivated here. And this is also crucial because awareness of death and impermanence is what is going to counter our habitual tendency to grasp at permanence of our own existence. And it is this kind of grasping at permanence of our own existence which often leads to all forms of trouble.
단 지든 심을 때 탑담아 사달라 다 좋은 렌즈지 말이 다 렌즈기 규전들 주 차시 차는 렌즈들이 배지다 이거를 이직하는 거 같이 들이 메이드 산에 들이 못당 뒤에 맨로 미기 주봉을 추진 아니 산재를 쳐서 줘야리야. 다 잠도든 되네. 영어처럼다. 시험이 좋은 것들은 천일의 지지집에 줄로래 이게 말이다. 자, 들으시죠. 다 들으인도잖아요. 또 지지심을 탑잡아서 하더라. 아니 대발을 주고 거다 뭐 잠도죠. 들으서 지서 내를 지지 잡아줘. 스타팅이부터.
So then having cultivated the awareness of death and impermanence, one then reflects upon the suffering of the lower realms, and then when explaining on that basis the actual method by which one brings about the fulfillment of the aspiration, then this is explained in terms of two practices. One is first establishing the basis by taking refuge in the three jewels, and then on that basis one learns to live according to the laws of karma. So in order, and the reason why the taking refuge in the three jewels is explained is that generally speaking, observance of morality, of abstaining from 10 negative actions in themselves, there's nothing uniquely about Buddhist. So in order for these practices of morality to become a Buddhist practice, they need to be grounded upon taking refuge in the three jewels. And when it comes to the specific aspects of the workings of karma, at this initial level, and also some aspects of the workings of karma at this point, then faith becomes an important factor to develop the conviction in them.
뭐야? 다 잠돌이야. 가나들 just 주, 달라들 just 유, 지대 just 럽자 just 반연시. 다 뒤송게하래.
And then in the section dealing with taking refuge in the three jewels, Tsongkhapa explains this in terms of identifying what kind of conditions are necessary on the part of the person who's seeking refuge, and what are the objects that are worthy of being refuge, and the manner in which one must seek refuge in them, and then what are the precepts that one must observe as a result of taking refuge, and then what are the benefits of taking refuge.
다데 람림 거리야 잠도 소야데 바다 나고 치샤 제제 송샤시샤 사이 고송도 위안데 소야다 제 송도아 다 잠도 야오지 삼다메이나 남들 리니베 난게 나 타버줘야다 대수단에 삼시다 거야 되샤 다 조조데 최근조 광람니 두야데 다 자와래 다 광람니 두야게 난가로 타로 또 인도잖아요 자셔로 근자봐 받은 나와서 식세 나리야 아니 다 고물로 주간다 러진 수십에 난게 또 가서 가나도문이로 달라지로 가나도님으로 달라지 미롱주로 생송샤 다 디마 디다디 그도래 다가 디그도마 간다지 쉐너는 시기 주에 있는 최고조 되게 말이 최고조 맞잖아 구조스미 이거 말이 셴네 아니 저우시 이거 말이 셴다 소로래 다 디자한테 잡지 다 러시기 메동아 캬랑에제 러시기 또나 아니 군제 자체 태기면도 선다 되게한테 저월래야 돼 다 데려야 고불루기 따다봐 도네 아니 동니 마찬아 땡중 되게 말해 땡중 마찬아 다 동니 세한데 원이 유튜브에 떠왔어 가지고 가야 매벽 좀 말해 동번이 세한데 뭐 주변에 떠게 시기하래 뭐 주변에 떠야게 계셔디 그 땡진 잡을 주고 인상 땡의 주고 인상 아니 뭐 주변에 떠래 스타디 시기하래 저들이 메이드 산에 또 동번이 태나 땡주 태바래 땡주 태나 고놈 태그래 tension matana goram thai mare o dini me du jane ta zawshir ga da di ko du jaba umo sikse na da shiru ja wa sha
So
ta namji liu ni ma che ene zawshir ga zhe sikse ta da ji che do sma jeri ne ene jixin ne lo sha chi de ge zhe mo sha
So when presenting the practices of going for refuge in this Lam Rim text, the presentation is made in such a way that it takes for granted that the practitioner is already a Buddhist. However, if you look at other approaches, such as in the second chapter of Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika, exposition of the valid cognition, and also where Dharmakirti presents a series of reasoning that establishes the possibility of attaining liberation. Similarly, in Chandrakirti's commentary on the 24th chapter of Nagarjuna's text, Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, there is a very clear and important explanation which is relevant here, because, for example, in the 24th chapter, Nagarjuna raises all the potential objections from the Buddhist realists or Buddhist essentialists, and where the question is raised, as we had one of the questions earlier, that if everything is devoid of inherent existence, then cause and effect relationships will not be possible. In that case, then the Dharma becomes untenable, and if the Dharma becomes untenable, there cannot be Sangha, and therefore there cannot be Buddha, and therefore the three jewels become untenable, and if the three jewels become untenable, then the Four Noble Truths become untenable. So the whole edifice of cause and effect relations break down. So in response to this, Nagarjuna actually turns the table to the opponent and says that in fact, within the worldview where one presupposes inherent existence, in fact the causal relation become impossible, because if emptiness is not tenable, then dependent origination becomes untenable, and if dependent origination becomes untenable, then cessation and the path leading to the cessation, all of these will become untenable, because when we speak of emptiness, we're not talking about mere nothingness or non-existence, but rather we are talking about emptiness of existence by means of inherent nature, existence by means of self-defining nature. So if emptiness becomes untenable, then there is no possibility of dependent relations being upheld. And if that is not possible, then the whole cessation and the path and the everything falls down. So in Chandrakirti's commentary, the kind of the exposition of these series of argument and the line of thinking is most excellently described. So for someone who takes refuge in the three jewels, understanding at least some aspects of these explanations may be very helpful. So, and this will come later on, so we can discuss.
동반이 다음에 있었나? 아니, 나만은 들어와 되는 지원 좋았다. 이거만 진짜야 시작해야지 또. 사다디 다음에 봐서 단다디 거야 마시블이 다음에 봐서야디 레치로보다 디도 녀업을 다 매저 말이 다 말아서 로리에 컨디션이었나? 아니 원하잖아. 다 써야 돼. 류승도 풍불로 때네 주자지. 임발라. 원하서 로래야. 류승이로 왕 그렇게 다 좋은다고 지금 로래 샤이도 와. 진짜 샤오는 지금 다야만 상당히 좋더셔.
So, and this relates to the question we had earlier. If there is no inherently existing self, what transmigrates? And so this is relates to this question. And part of the problem is coming from the fact of not fully understanding the meaning of no self, the teaching of no self. And when Buddha speaks about there being no self, he is not rejecting the existence of a self of the person. There is a person who accumulates the action, there is a person who experiences the consequences of that action. What is being rejected is that if we analyze the nature of ourself, although in reality the self or the person exists in dependence upon the physical and the mental elements that make up the individual's existence, but in our naive perception of ourselves, we tend to kind of assume a self that is somehow a kind of a master that reigns over, that rules over our body and mind, and somehow that is independent of them. So that it is that kind of self that we assume to exist that is being negated. So generally when Buddhism says there is no self, it is this kind of conceived self, that is a conception of self that is being rejected.
Anil habar tongpani sluzane tenjung gyunzendu chari, tene jungwa, tene tawa gyunzendu chari, rangshini mojores, zhuyundu zane, chigi yeba chigi kane samtang godmata, meba samtang dwa.
So in particular, when the teaching on emptiness is presented on the basis of using dependent origination, the fact that things come into being on the in dependence upon other factors, that things are dependently designated, the fact that these are used as the kind of the basis to demonstrate the emptiness of phenomena itself suggests some form of existence that is being recognized.
Yeah. That so today in Zane, Chogunjo Gordon, that yes, Gordon said, Jishijal, younger Rangul, Juru Bachi, to be a chick. Dana Shingi, that Gordon said, too much yin so, Tada Bachi, Kanda Banja. 去因素它的是给些原因在呢，天这个去因素，那么它的我都吃完了，去因的多不要，去因的我都吃不要的，所以这因在呢，国天到南天时啊，给些因在呢，去因讲了，做对吧？都你讲做对吧？大概呢是到大面。就是了，这个他定波嘛，所谓的他说被差些差，那是你要出么事的？刚才呢，内陆沿路找到了查拉也把印度站呢，没人不找到了查拉前呢，跟住点吧，这些个是写不了呀，根据他们查些查呢写不了呀，对，去年夸查过来些，这提醒都进来，都进查了，你下呢有的在呢，刚才呢都跟查问那些写完了，没人不查没写过来的，他了呀，一路查没开始写过来的，所以这里没得在呢，刚才第一呢就电信那些的也好写不了呀。东尼夸的被开什么了下，真正印度站呢，讲着那么大把钱，养下来呀，还是东尼带来抓下来，还是我那边我的钱呢。
So what is required on the part of the practitioner when taking refuge in the three jewels is first of all to have some understanding of the possibility of cessation in general, and particularly the possibility of cessation in oneself. Here, when we talk about cessation in the Buddhist context, we are talking about the possibility of all the pollutants of the mind, the afflictions, being dissolved and cleansed within the nature of mind itself. So in order to understand the nature of cessation, some degree of understanding of emptiness becomes indispensable. And so furthermore, when we talk about the origin of suffering, the afflictions, particularly if one's understanding of afflictions is deep, then one needs to understand affliction at its root, which is the fundamental ignorance. And as I explained before, depending upon what your understanding of the ultimate view of reality is, it's going to have a difference upon how you define the fundamental ignorance to be. So in any case, to have a deeper understanding of the subtle level of ignorance, again, some understanding of the way in which things really exist, which is the nature of reality, becomes again essential. Similarly, when we talk about suffering, the suffering and its very subtle level, again, to have that understanding of emptiness becomes important. So, therefore, to really take refuge in the three jewels in the most ideal manner, some degree of understanding of emptiness becomes very important.
대신도 부ddham shanam kachami suzane buddha sade leja gedi koaliya gyan sambada ji lodri gyaba na jugeba re aso pyaga nala ani leja buddha sa ko niga lo pyaga chinale ba niga changchen changchu senda ya 다가는 지금 쌍게 사 아다 측디기 부대 되니가 나다 참되지 송도가 찾아가다 레부사제가 살다 네가 뒤념을 주지 나는 빵거 타다 잡아더니 너 시졌어 톡수 치고 뒤지도 용대야 패지 레디네 거라 냐라 축사게 시졌어 톡수 치고 용알라 디 로이 때문에 시제시에 시제지기하기 그게 누버로 싸워지고 거라 죽고야 매버서시 거라 시제 찾아 찍는 일배 이봐 따라 하네 일을 치에 권에 시제시에 계속 계속 그 시제 예어다 지대신이 시제 예어체 다 로코란 게 지대신이 시제 리아게 누버디 예어체 다 누버디 여르데 누버디 셈모토베 개진지 그게 주지지 예배링들라 유디 리모도체 개진의 셈에 대만타들은 유디를 줘야지 그 용도가 균형도 줘야지 그래서 이런 의미도잖아요 창세야 되냐는 뭐지는 주용통도 그래서 축창스면 창축 개 상스말로 상개 슬러다 다시 들으셔 그래서 들으지 창축도 상개세하고 고야고 차가래야 tima chiki su taya tima didi yani chuyin marigba chani chuyin marigba te kona ni rig mari nigi chane kwanda ni sa didi kwadi legwa chirwa hadiri sha wadiri ni sane kyamdu yago jongwa ya tongni kwadi bekya chimura sha hadiri jiri.
So for example, when we go for refuge to the Buddha and say Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, I go for refuge to the Buddha. The Sanskrit term Buddha has two different connotations. One is Buddha can mean cleansing of the faults or pollutants, but it can also mean flourishing or development. So such as blossoming of the petals of the lotus is referred to as Buddha. However, in the Tibetan equivalent of the term, both these two aspects of the meaning are brought together and a composite term is created that is Sangye. And Sangye, Sangba means to be awakened or to cleanse, and Gyeba means to develop, to blossom, and or to flourish. So both of these meanings are brought together. Similarly, the Sanskrit term for bodhi in Tibetan, Changchup is used, where again both meanings of the term are brought into a single composite term. And although at the level of Buddhahood, total cleansing of all the faults and total perfection of all the qualities may be simultaneous, but in the process, one needs to proceed by eliminating the obscurations first. So, because when it comes to the Buddha's enlightened qualities of the mind, insofar as the kind of the cognition of the reality is concerned, that quality is naturally present in our mind. It's not a new quality that needs to be cultivated afresh. The process primarily involves removing the obstacles that obscure the expression of that natural cognitive quality, and so long as the obstacles are present, they obscure, and then this quality, natural quality, doesn't become awakened. So therefore, in the Tibetan word, sang is put first, and geba, the development of perfection, comes later. So the main point is that to really understand the significance and meaning of going for refuge, one needs to have some understanding of the objects of refuge, and here too, some degree of understanding of the teaching on emptiness again becomes important, because one needs to understand what is meant by Buddhahood and how Buddhahood is defined in terms of cleansing and dissolving of all the pollutants within the nature of mind itself, and how enlightenment and unenlightenment are defined in terms of the state of mind itself, whether it remains in ignorance or whether it becomes awakened. So this is what defines samsara and nirvana, enlightenment and unenlightened state. So therefore, even to understand the concept of buddhi or enlightenment, some understanding of the teaching on emptiness becomes crucial.
다 담람 사는 거 참이 시전에 따라라셔. 달마스도 지바 껴봐. 세상에 껴배 뭐디 고대. 껴치지 람데. 그냥 동네 가서 고도와.
So similarly, when we say dharmam sharanam gacchami, I go for refuge to the dharma, the Sanskrit term dharma has the connotation of something that holds you or something that protects you. So again here, in order to fully understand the significance of these terms, some understanding of emptiness becomes crucial as well.
대신도 상감 사는 거 참이시전에 겨울 듬바.
Similarly, when we take refuge in the Sangha, Sangam Sharanam Gacchami, and Sangha literally means those who aspire for goodness. And goodness here is identified with the cessation. So again, to understand the meaning of Sangha, some notion of understanding of cessation and emptiness becomes important.
다 제대로 겹서 놓은 것도 더네. 아니, 렌제, 로 카살리티. 다 질 렌제서야지 두든 데뷔 된주도 시켜야래. 다 두든 데뷔 된주는 나도 제라도 레스도 차와래. 차와서도 제법지. 삼배 군루 토네. 두셔베도 차와진 거래. 두 제법지. 진짜로 두 제법. 군루 다 군운의 전이 두셔야 차와지기 두다 대 왕초에 되고 다 조조가 되도 ስለ잖아요. 초아로다. 초스도 시베 차시시로다. 시베 난시로다. 자상가 대용약에 고려 규칙 시작하는 것 때문에 지금 요구로 와. 자상가 다 시베 때문에 내 사지 샤유 그거다 샤유요래 심주 삼바사야 가네. That's Ramada, what you look at, let us Sujin Shakyari. Lumagale, Sujingale, Tene Yile, Sembele, Yile, Delisha.
Preceded by taking refuge in the three jewels, one then needs to understand the law of karma, causality. So when we talk about law of karma, we're talking about, in general, the law of causality itself. And the law of, so karma is a subset of the law of causality. So karma refers to a very specific kind of causal relation where, because when we use the word karma literally means action. And when we talk about action, we are talking about an activity involving an agent with an intention. So karmic law refers to a causal process that is begun by an agent with intention, and that intentional act creates a chain, resulting with its consequences. So this law of causality is referred to as karmic law of causality. So when we talk about karma, principally here we are talking about a causal events that are related to a sentient being's experience of pain and pleasure, happiness and suffering. So when we are talking about experiences, we are talking about a mental phenomena, and therefore when we talk about the events at the mental level, then their causes must also principally belong to that category of phenomena as well. Therefore, so when we talk about karma, we are principally referring to one of the mental factors that are present, in the state of mind of the person. So within the Buddhist schools, Vaibhashika and Prasangika sometimes also include physical actions as belonging to the karma, but generally other schools identify karma principally with a mental factor.
Yeah. So now for 17. Okay, finish now. Stop.